Are there things that you could do just looking at your existing strategies you have? Maybe it's time for a checkup. Maybe there's some room for improvement with your current strategies. Well, I don't know if I'm going to cover every subject. We have a whole 2-day-long workshop that gets into this. But it would be helpful to visit a couple of topics on this issue. Are there things we can do to make houses more accessible? And are there things that we can do to help people save money on their energy costs in a house? Each of those in turn. Universal design. I do want to share with you just 4 basic principles of universal design. What are a couple of principles that you could think about how you can incorporate this into your work? As you think about these next 2 slides here, think about if you're working with any nonprofit developers, let's say you have, we were talking about it earlier, a new construction strategy to provide money to a nonprofit developer early on as they're building a single-family house. They're going to build it and they're going to sell it to a low-income, SHIP-eligible person. You could say, whenever anybody builds these single-family houses for us, of course you got to build it to the Florida Building Code, and you have to have A, B, C features, you know? And some of these features could be things like for equitable use. Now, let me just give you an example of what I mean when I talk about equitable use. It is designed to aid in the function of whatever you're trying to do in the house without creating an undue burden on any other user. And so we see that a curb, now this isn't a housing example, but a curbside cut. And that works well for bicyclists, for baby strollers, for a person in a wheelchair, and yet it doesn't really hinder anybody's ability to use a sidewalk. And so I'll give you another example in just a minute as we talk about low physical effort. That is what some people need, whether they be young children, people with a temporary disability, people with a permanent disability, or maybe elderly people. They may not have as much physical strength as others do. And yet, that can be compensated with some design features like, for example, I think of doorknobs, okay? 2 basic types of doorknobs. When I was growing up, there were the ball doorknobs. And this is a little tough for some people to make that sort of grip, hold on to it, and turn it in this way. But then there's also the type of door handle that's not a ball turn, but rather it's a lever that comes out. So you grab it and you move down. Or if you don't have quite that much dexterity, you just kind of push down on it and push the door in. Less physical effort, more of a universally accessible way of opening up a door. And so we can see that these 2, that example I gave you kind of also works for equitable use. This second type of a doorknob that I'm mentioning doesn't hurt anybody, but it makes it easier for some people to live in that house just on their own strength and abilities. Safety-oriented, we've talked about a little bit here. Now let's recognize that I mean that in 2 ways. I have been talking about the whole burglars and all that stuff, and I'll say a word about that again. But consider also that we want things in, we want like rounded edges on our furniture. We want things that will help prevent falls or things like that. I think about if you have a 2-story dwelling and you're on the 2nd story walking in a hallway or something, perhaps there's a pattern on the carpet that as you're approaching the stairs, that pattern stops. And now there's just a solid color line or something like that. So there's a visual cue which alerts you, hey, something's about to change farther along. And there's redundant cues in that fashion. Redundant audio and visual cues that alert you to the environment around you. Now, when we talk about safety-oriented, you've probably maybe heard this phrase CPTED also, crime prevention through environmental design. And just a couple of thoughts about what that means, because that's also about safety, physical safety, and feeling safe against crime and all that stuff in your area. A couple of concepts there that are helpful. What can you do to encourage in the design of units that you have things that will offer a natural surveillance? By that, That's kind of the opposite of, it's not like there's a lot of shrubs where intruders or prowlers could hide. No, the landscaping doesn't hide anybody. You can clearly see intruders. They're visible in parking areas, in around doors and windows. There's adequate nighttime lighting. There's a natural ability to survey around your house. There's also what they would call territorial reinforcement. This concept that there is a very clear distinction between public areas on the street and your private area, right? And this is done by having a hedge or landscaping or a fence. It doesn't necessarily have to be a security fence. It is a fence that says, look, anybody in their right mind would know that that little fence means this is my private yard and that's the public area that's on the street. In this way, reinforcing what is your private territory is another way that helps deter crime. Target hardening is just a fancy way of saying making sure that you have proper window locks and deadbolts, and that even your interior doors have hinges that are strong enough to really provide some protection if it's needed. And then one final thing that I think is kind of interesting about this approach, this septet approach, is the concept. Have y'all ever heard the broken window theory? You know what I mean when I say the broken window theory? It's the idea that if you have a neighborhood or a house that has just one broken window, just that one small thing can almost be kind of a psychological invitation for folks to come in and say, oh, I don't have to regard this person's personal privacy or personal property quite as much. It's the idea that small little things that go unmaintained can lead to bigger problems down the road. If there wasn't that first broken window, then everybody who's passing by or whatever would not consider that a target, would not consider that something that's private, that's not private property. So anyway, all of these things work together to think about the physical safety of that dwelling. That's something that you also can maybe encourage as you're encouraging housing development. And finally, this concept of approach and use, making sure that the size and the space of things in the house is really accessible to as many people as possible. Consider that we all have different body sizes, different heights and such, and there is a more universally accessible area that is on the down part of our reach than there is the upper part. Now, I'm not going to embarrass two of y'all, but I could bring a tall and a short person up here and ask both of y'all to reach, like high and low. And what we would see is that the tall person could reach high a lot better, but everybody's low reach is about the same. It's fairly average, about the same. And this is also, of course, especially good for children and for people in wheelchairs. And so this is just one concept among this approach and use principle that helps us to encourage storage in bathrooms and kitchens that is low, and that is also designed in such a way that a person with a wheelchair could pull up to it quickly, close enough in order to really use that counter or that appliance or that cabinet. Okay, so that's just a couple of things to help you consider this thing that we should probably be fostering in all of the housing that we're producing. Is this a part of the building code? Not really. You don't have to do any of this stuff according to our minimum codes of what a house can be built to, but it's probably a good idea. Now here's another little something, just for what it's worth. You could actually just use these 7 items. You could say, these 7 items need to be, any house that you build needs to be compliant in these 7 ways. Just so you know, this list of 7 items right here, and I'll just point out a couple of them, reinforced walls for grab bars. Look, that's not saying that every house has to have grab bars in the bathroom. Just remember that behind it, there's enough wood to reinforce if you ever needed to install grab bars. Because certainly, if you didn't plan for that, you'd put up your drywall, and then if somebody needed grab bars later on, You know, you can't just like attach it right to the drywall and expect that's going to hold the grab bar and somebody's weight. No, you're going to be able to attach that to some lumber behind the scenes. If you haven't planned for that beforehand, you're going to have to rip that whole wall down, put in some lumber reinforcement, and then put another piece of drywall on top of it. Whenever we're helping to finance housing with our home, CDBG, or SHIP dollars, maybe these are things that serve a public purpose that we should make as a requirement whenever you're building houses for us.